Hello. Today we're going to talk about video essays. I know, strange isn't it, using the medium to discuss the medium? It's all very meta and postmodern. But it is a topic worth discussing, especially on the unofficial home of the video essay, YouTube. The proliferation of video essays on YouTube has been going on for well over a decade, and usurped the previously most popular video content produced by its core audience, the vlog. While it is hard to trace a patient zero for video essays, and everyone has their own opinion on who popularised it, I'm going to put my eggs in the every frame a painting basket, the first of whose videos, all narrated and edited by Tony Zhu, appeared in 2014, and covered topics within the craft of cinema and television. His presentation style and editing format have been endlessly replicated, but not bettered, ever since. He wasn't the first to make a video essay for YouTube, but he certainly formalised the style. What is most interesting about the channel and its influence is that it directly analysed the idea of the video essay, in its own video essay on Tony Zhu's favourite film essay, F is for Fake by Orson Welles, called How to Structure a Video Essay, Essayception. In that video essay, Zhu analyses Wells' approach to storytelling by looking at structure. He shows how F is for Fake is built around multiple narrative threads and bounces between each element to maintain interest and impart the information the film wants to tell. While Zhu's video essay is astute and compact, coming in at under 5 minutes as opposed to the contemporary standard for over an hour for most video essays on YouTube, it looks at how the story is told, not what a video essay is, or rather, what a video essay is really about. Because all video essays are essentially about the same thing. You see, video essays are all about...
Look at Daddy, I got a camera for you!
A video essay is a YouTube video with a thesis that tries to prove a point. It is basically like a school essay with a video component where you are trying to argue with something. Trying to argue for something.
The best work has always taken place despite the university rather than because of it, and all of the most interesting and consequential political projects intellectual or academic projects that I could name have had at least a significant foot outside the university universe, or have tried to address themselves to people who are not of that tradition.
Epistemology is the term for the study of knowledge. This seems like a tautological school of study, as it would require making knowledge about knowledge. But it is a worthwhile endeavour, because one of the main problems we have as humans is understanding what we know. That sounds confusing though, because we already know what we know because we know it, right? Well, maybe not. First, what even is knowledge? It's defined as a sort of cognitive success that allows for the completion of tasks or the prediction of outcomes. It is derived from retained information and relies primarily on memory and record. Again, it sounds strange to try and define that which we know because, well, we know it, but that's why it's worth understanding. People who study this have divided knowledge into 3 areas. Acquaintance knowledge, which is about our familiarity with objects, procedural knowledge, which is about our abilities and skills, and propositional knowledge, which is our understanding and belief in facts. The big question in epistemology is, how do we arrive at these forms of knowledge? Well, Immanuel Kant believed knowledge was either a priori, which means prior to experience, meaning knowledge was arrived at through logic, or posteriori, meaning knowledge was derived after it was experienced. The problem we have is that if knowledge was arrived at a priori, then what knowledge did we use to arrive at that understanding? And if knowledge was arrived at posteriori, how can we know that those experiences were true or replicable for everyone? In short, why does experiencing something make it a fact?
I should premise this with, I'm certainly not a video essay expert outside of, the ones I've made, which are a lot. Establish the thesis, make sure the thesis is really interesting and raises more questions. Or you're sort of like writing a check that the viewer wants to see cashed. You say something, you prove a thing, then you ask another question, or you bring up a counter argument that's interesting. And all these little moments are moments where the viewer wants to keep watching. And so, yes, it's YouTube-ified in that sense, but also these are all elements of good writing. We talked a lot about the writing rule of like, if your story beats are connected by and, it's boring. I went to the store and I went to Walmart and I went here and I went there. More interesting stories connected with but and therefore.
What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but.
I think that it's easy to get overexcited about the notion that just because we have this philosophical concept of epistemology, just because we are able to say that knowledge isn't just a sort of natural given, but is something that warrants philosophical or other interrogation on its own terms, that therefore that necessarily means that there is some sort of marketplace of epistemologies in the same way as there's allegedly a marketplace of ideas. We, in our different class and regional contexts, in our different national backgrounds and traditions, we know different things, and we might call different things knowledge, or regard different things as having the kind of authority of knowledge with a capital K. But at the same time, I think claims that different groups of people substantially know differently, as opposed to just know different things or prioritize different things, I think that can be overstated. I'd put it this way: if you think of us as two people with different epistemologies, well, the fact that we could even explain what our epistemologies are to each other rather suggests that they weren't so different in the first place. The actually different epistemology is the one that's lurking there behind your wardrobe, but that you'll never know about because it's impossible for you to incorporate it into your knowledge. If we use this term to describe entire systems of what it is possible to know, then I think that it's a sort of essentialism or a sort of defeatism or a kind of romanticism even to think that these things are so fundamentally unbridgeable as all that.
Justified True Belief, or JTB, was a method developed to understand the origin of knowledge. To explain this concept, let me play my guitar. Please. The JTB method holds that for you to know something, you must first believe something. I believe the note of this fret is a G, say. This knowledge can derive from what is true. This is because you cannot know something that is not true. You cannot know that this note is a C because it isn't true. Therefore, truth here means a contact with reality. But for a true belief, our proposition must be justified. Justified knowledge comes from testing our belief. I can play this note and hear the familiar sound of a G note. Not only that, I can use a tuner or play along with other people in the same key, and what do you know? It's a G. Thus, this becomes a justified true belief and therefore knowledge.
Plenty of me.
But I think the A and B storylines don't do as well on YouTube. Like, I'm sure people can find examples, or maybe it's not in the YouTube spaces I watched, but I'm acutely aware of that. And I've often had stories where there's like two different elements that I'd like to keep talking about in tandem. But I think the Meanwhile the Ranch doesn't work as well, unless maybe you're making like Mr. Beast style content. Probably works in that sense. We had a rule that I'm sure you remember. We call it the ABAB rule. Where often for our philosophy videos, we were talking about philosophy and we were talking about a TV show or movie. And you never wanted to linger too long on just A or just B, just the philosophy or just the TV show. And so you're kind of telling the story of the TV show and then, not saying Meanwhile Back at the Ranch, but like zooming out to the philosophy, like, Hegel says this or something like that. I guess maybe you can make the argument that it's a similar storytelling structure, but at the same time, I think it's a lot different than like, cutting to Luke on Tatooine or something like that.
Therefore and but. Meanwhile, back at the ranch.
In the 70s and 80s, there was this run of safety information films that were either broadcast on television or shown to children as videos, or, different contexts were shown to kids and teenagers because there was a lot of old infrastructure and new infrastructure in and around the country that could be seen as dangerous. So a lot of kids and teenagers had to be informed of the dangers of these sorts of things. Now, the thing with this was they had to impart the knowledge, right? They had to tell people that the new power lines that were installed were dangerous, or they had to tell kids to not go swimming in the pools of water that were in these old abandoned mines, because it was all dangerous. They had to be told about this. But the way in which they told these stories is the stuff of legend now. If you meet anyone of my age or older, they'll tell you about how they were scarred for life by these information films because they were shot on grainy 16mm film, and they were always about some kid who drowned while swimming in a mine, or who lost their legs whilst trying to cross a railway track where there wasn't a crossing, or a kid who flew a kite too close to a pylon. And it was always shot and edited in this way that made it more like a horror film. There's whole accounts on social media like Scarfuck or Scarred for Life who talk about how terrifying all of this stuff was. And it really made a cultural impact. You speak to anyone of that age and they'll tell you they never go near railway sidings or they never go near pylons or anything like this because of these information films. So they could have imparted the knowledge, but they couched it in a narrative and a storytelling form that scared the crap out of you. So it imparted the knowledge, but with something else. And consequently, we can look at these old safety information films, or I think you call them in America, after-school specials. You can look at these specific brand of safety information films as being a type of epistemological storytelling. They impart knowledge, but they have to impart it in a specific way that comes couched with warning or caution or danger. And as such, this is a good example of the fact that there's no such thing as pure or untainted knowledge, because there's always conveyance with the knowledge, right? There's always a way that knowledge has to be imparted to you. There's a context with which you receive that knowledge. It always comes packaged with perceptual distinctions or biases. And consequently, that means knowledge is never completely pure. It's never just straight, untainted knowledge. One of the problems of justification in epistemology is whether it is external or internal. Simply put, this is the notion that you might derive knowledge from internal justifications, such as our perceived experiences, memory or logical conclusions, or external ones, like written or testimonial justifications. And we're back to Kant's a priori and posteriori. The problem with external justification is that we can't know that external justification is true. I tune my guitar based on that tuner, but what if the tuner is wrong and I don't know? What if the people I'm playing with don't use a tuner? Who said a tuner was correct in the first place? External justification is tricky, and some philosophers believe it isn't even possible given the existence of something called the Gettier problem, which gives examples of how justification can't be relied upon. The most famous of which being the stopped clock that strikes twice a day. You might see the time on the stopped clock at the time it actually is that time of day, and then your belief is justified, even though the clock is wrong. All of this is to say, it's hard to justify what you believe is true.
What is the argument and how are you developing and defining it? And the way the uniqueness is in the argument, the uniqueness is in the research, the uniqueness is in all of these things. And the rest is just sort of good storytelling tools. People often discover secrets of the YouTube algorithm, and what they're really just describing is good storytelling.
There is something of a misunderstanding about data. Companies and governments rely on data to inform their policies and practices because it is a good indicator of where to put their resources and where those resources would be most beneficial. The trouble is, this treats data as a naturally occurring product. It isn't. Contrary to what some people may argue, data is not collected, it is generated. Data doesn't exist until it is constructed. Presenting data as a wild growth to be harvested avoids accountability for those who generate it. If a think tank produces data about the benefits of tax cuts for the wealthy and reduction of welfare spending and the government implements it, the assumption is that because this was a data-driven policy, then it makes the most sense. The argument being that if the numbers add up, it's the right thing to do, regardless of the harm it might enact. The problem with this assumption is that it removes agency from the think tank, and specifically, its agency in generating the data. Those mythic numbers governments need to make add up didn't exist before the think tank or survey team generated them. So why did they make them? This is another example of the problem with justification, but also the problem with believing something to be true in the first place. Your knowledge, if internally justified, is subject to emotion and personal desire, and if externally justified, subject to the malleability of information or experience. What a think tank does by generating data specifically to influence political policy is that it creates knowledge. And it can do this by creating an epistemic community. This is a group of people who share a set of beliefs that they think are true and then justify them as best they can.
The rhetorical claim is that this is the biggest snapshot that we've ever had of human motivation, human behaviour, human conduct, and this is the biggest opportunity we've ever had to make our systems responsive to what people want and what people want causality to be, what they want to happen after something else has happened. You make the first elementary critique of that this data is always being interpreted, and those algorithms are the opposite of this kind of capacious, huge, United Colours of Benetton snapshot of everybody together. The algorithm is the most jealously guarded secret of every one of these platforms, and as you say, it is not that the data is speaking; it is that the algorithm is soliciting certain messages from it, and the users will never get to know what those guiding questions and requests and so on are. Anything that is based on drawing your authority for what ought to happen on the basis of a huge aggregation of what has happened, that is structurally conservative, because it doesn't allow for the possibility that something else might happen. It is actually a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy which says, well, we've got the data on this. This is what has always been happening. Everyone has clicked this after clicking that. Therefore, they're going to be offered this every time. We're going to make damn sure that they continue to always click that.
How do you know me? Do you know me? How do you know me? It's one of those questions that people ask a lot. It's like, how well do you know someone? How well do you know me? How well do you know yourself? But it's a good question. Do you know me? I mean, judging by my subscribers and my viewers list, you probably do know me. You're probably someone I'm on first name terms with, because I don't have a lot of subscribers. But how do you know me? Where did you know me from? What was the context in which we met? Did we meet online? Did we meet in person? Are we old friends? You know, things like that. But even to those people who do know me well, how well do they know me? What do they know of me? How well does anyone know anyone? What is it we know about them? What is your epistemological understanding of someone based on? Is it based on your interactions with them? Is it a priori knowledge? Did you deduce what someone's like by seeing them on screen? Or is it posteriori knowledge of them based on your interactions with them, how good a friend you are, your conversations and things like that? How well do you know anyone? Video essays on YouTube were a boom industry for a while, but like everything, once you've noticed the boom, it's already too late to cash in on it. This sphere has produced more than a few celebrities, with the likes of Lindsay Ellis, H. Bomberguy, ContraPoints, Adam Neely, HD Signifier, and Abigail Thorne, to name but a few, having millions of views and subscribers amongst them, and they have all produced work that has impacted public discussion and informed thinking on a variety of topics. They also all collaborate regularly. All but ContraPoints are on the streaming site called Nebula, owned and created by them and other video essayists. In this way, the video essay sphere has become an epistemic community, and just like those think tanks, they generate knowledge, making it their business to justify things they believe to be true. To clarify, an epistemic community is not a bad thing. Schools, colleges, and unions could all be called epistemic communities. But sometimes what gets overlooked is that all communities suffer from groupthink over time, given the way they will attract people with the same interests or similar beliefs. This basically means new members want more of, or already own, knowledge that these communities help create. Now, the argument for YouTube is that this groupthink shouldn't be possible. There is a far broader appeal to YouTube, and the platform encourages a diversity of creators to post. This should, therefore, generate a wider pool of knowledge. But that's not necessarily true either.
There's sort of two filters that happen that, if you're a person interested in learning things, are pretty big setbacks. One is that there is a very perverse incentive for anyone, no matter how cool they are on the internet, to do things that will perform well in the algorithm. Some creators kind of get away with it by sheer personality, where anything they put out, everyone will watch. But a lot of video essayists are like, what's trending in the news? What can I say that's unique? And they'll put out like a good video, but you're sort of pre-filtering any information you might get by functionally what the algorithms have decided you should watch. The other part of that is, if they are successful, they're probably successful because they're good storytellers, because they're smart, but because they understand the pacing of YouTube, which is not very forgiving to, I don't want to say depth, but like a certain kind of depth, right? If you compare the experience to reading a book, if you were just to copy and paste like a book into a YouTube script and make it a little more talky, it wouldn't work. Books have so many tangents. They have so many like deep dives, and like there's exceptions. But I think smart script editors in the space would be like, oh, this is a tangent. I need to stay hyper-focused because people can click off at any moment in this like hyper-rich environment. And so the shortcomings of the platform are like, you're getting a very kind of filtered experience. Every medium has its own filter, but those are sort of the filters that I would associate with YouTube. And I'm sure there's other ones as well.
It's the capitalism, stupid. It's always marketization and commodification that produces the perverse incentives. The trap that many content creators are sort of incentivized to fall into, which is to treat concepts as if they are a sort of trans-historical given. Feminism is this, anti-racism is this, as opposed to these being highly contested issues that people have got into all kinds of quandaries and backed themselves into all kinds of corners over for decades.
YouTube has a class problem. I discussed this in my previous video, but the gist is that due to the way YouTube's algorithm surfaces videos, creators must make their content to serve the algorithm, or it will struggle to be seen or just be outright hidden. YouTube tries to be transparent with its criteria for what it deems worthy of viewing by its users, but the simple fact is there are criteria. Either an editor or group select that criteria for the algorithm to surface videos, usually based on technical aspects like the quality of picture, resolution, audio clarity, and so on, but there is also criteria on the content itself. We all know the problems with YouTube's content awareness software that erroneously flags topics and images deemed unsuitable regardless of the context, because that content-aware filter still acts on language, imagery, and topics that contextually should not warrant a video being flagged. Hence why so many YouTubers now bleep swear words, blur swastikas, and generally avoid mentioning difficult or problematic topics. The result is that YouTube pushes video makers on its platform to generate knowledge based on its guidelines, and the most popular video essayists must meet the criteria the platform sets or be ignored. Combined with the other criteria, this typically means people from lower income socioeconomic groups are surfaced less because they cannot afford the equipment of sufficient quality to produce a video, or the access to academic knowledge required, be that in not attending an expensive school, a university, or living in an area where libraries aren't shutting down or having books removed from their shelves. This is how a class disparity can emerge within YouTube, which is much the same as anywhere today, but is problematic when a lot of users derive knowledge from this platform. Consequently, the knowledge generated by the epistemic community of YouTube must be viewed with healthy skepticism.
You have an association, right? The content is fun, it's engaging, and I like this person. And I want to hear what they have to say about X. And maybe you didn't even know you realized you were interested in such a thing, and now you're watching an hour-long video on Nietzsche. And then, of course, there's people who are like, I want to learn philosophy. this is a good source of philosophy information. I'm going to watch all these philosophy tube videos, or maybe just someone, coming along. It's like, oh, I just watch all their videos on this topic and not these. So yeah, I think it's clearly all of the above, but the sort of kind of cool and interesting part is that, there's lots to criticize about parasocial relationships, but if it's making you watch a 45-minute deep dive into like philosophy, not just philosophy, but like, any smart, informative, thoughtful topic, like that's cool. I like that.
You were speaking to people who, okay, they want to know the information that you have to impart, and they like you and they trust you and they trust your excellent tasting guests, but they also are putting it on while they're doing the ironing or going for a jog, in the same way that you might put on music or whatever. Netflix, yeah. There is a combination of things at stake when somebody believes what Leo Cookman tells them. They believe it as knowledge. They also believe it as company, and they believe it as as this sort of tacit background content, because we're all so atomized and separated and antisocial that we now have to treat each other like budgerigars who have been left at home with the radio on to keep us sort of stimulated. No offense.
Now, you don't know these people. I imagine you can probably guess. This is old DV footage that I dredged up from some tapes I had of mine and digitized, and as such you can probably make an educated guess that these are friends of mine and family, and you'd be right. These are old friends and family from back in the 2000s when I got a camera and was trying to be a little filmmaker. Didn't really work out the way I'd planned, but yeah, this is some old footage of the good old days. And it's just nice watching these old videos now as a middle-aged man and seeing how differently people behaved in front of a camera then. But returning to the topic at hand, who are these people? Well, that's my dad. This was actually the last video of him ever filmed. He died 2 months later of cancer. This is my mum. She died in June of this year. And this is my friend Ben, who was a drummer for my friend's band and was, a scene stalwart. He died in March. What does that knowledge now of this video you've been watching, what does that knowledge do to your understanding of me? What does that knowledge do to your understanding of epistemology? How did learning that change your understanding of everything you've seen in this video so far? Video essays are not a bad thing. Their proliferation and the access to knowledge they offer is of great benefit to millions of people. I love them. I've written a few you might have seen. But it is not without problems. Tony Zhu highlighted the construct behind a video essay back in 2014, and the genre has only ballooned in popularity since then, utilising that template. This formatting approach should be better recognised, because in the same way news media manufactures consent by accepting official reports and policy from the ruling class, then simply regurgitating that information uncritically, YouTube's video essays are deeply critical, but from a typically middle-class, generally well-educated perspective. This does not mean that the knowledge they generate is wrong, though some might be, but it does mean the knowledge they generate is an attempt to justify a belief in what is true. The philosopher David Hume had a good response to epistemic claims that works regarding epistemic communities like YouTube called mitigated skepticism. This argues that we cannot truly know anything, and so-called strong knowledge claims shouldn't be accepted, but weaker ones can be. This means that we can know that the sun will rise even though the time changes every day, and we can know the sky is blue even when it isn't at sunset or dusk, and other general pragmatic approaches to knowledge that get us through the day. But the bigger claims deserve skepticism. What this means is that anyone who says anything with certainty should be questioned. Most video essays don't present certainty and actively encourage epistemological dissent, like when the host says, "What do you think?" at the end of the video as an encouragement for engagement. But we as audiences are still guilty of accepting video essays as authoritative.
The reason why we have had a sort of proliferation of epistemology-related terms, I don't know, I wouldn't take that as a symptom of a sort of revolution in the sophistication of our understanding of knowledge. Rather, it is a symptom of the fact that the kind of the radicalization of politics at every place on the political spectrum in the past decade has incentivized people all over the spectrum to actually say that the other side isn't merely wrong or isn't even merely misinformed. Their whole kind of scope of what they think counts as knowledge is illegitimate. There's not an argument to be had. There's not a process of political convincing and debate to take place. On the contrary, this group needs to be simply closed off, and their knowledge needs to be delegitimated. So I do think that actually there's possibly a sort of ominous side to the kind of epistemology revolution that I suspect that you're kind of responding to in wanting to cover this topic.
So Foucault talks about power knowledge. Yeah, we were going to get there eventually. There's always got to be some sort of philosopher in all of this. But yeah, Foucault talks about power knowledge, whereby power is built on the dispersal and reproduction of knowledge. It can also be generated by withholding knowledge as well. But it's basically talks about how power controls you, and it does that with knowledge. So depending on how much you know, the person who's imparting that knowledge or has the knowledge before you do can predict outcomes, either outcomes of the knowledge they have, or they can predict how you'll react to this knowledge, or predict how you'll react without this knowledge. We often say knowledge is power, but Foucault really went into this idea of like how powerful people retain knowledge and generate knowledge and create it themselves. So video essayists generate knowledge as well, but equally, because if we look at it through a Foucauldian lens, they also generate power. The knowledge they have generates as much power as much as they generate knowledge, right? It's knowledge that already existed. They read books about it and so on and so forth, but they have access to academic circles or other resources that you might not have, and are compacting a huge wealth of knowledge into a short or very long video essay, and that gives them a certain level of power because they have that knowledge and you don't. Now, this isn't a bad thing, More often than not, a lot of what we see on social media, particularly on TikTok accounts and on YouTube, they act as a counterweight to sort of right-wing establishment media. But this still must be understood as power in its own right. And importantly, they're not the sole arbiters of knowledge. And that's what's so inspirational about YouTube in general, is not that these million subscribed YouTube video essayists are the ones with all the knowledge and imparting it to you, but that they can gather it, that the power does not just have to come from these incredibly wealthy organizations and corporations or world leaders. They are the people with all the power and with all the knowledge specifically. Knowledge can be gained and knowledge can be generated amongst us. It can be collaborative. So we all generate knowledge and we all share knowledge. There is no set of knowledges. There are no epistemologies. It's not like a marketplace of ideas. There is knowledge. The thing we should be wary of with video essayists, like myself, like all of the millions of others video essayists that there are, what we need to be wary of is that we don't give them too much power. We enjoy the knowledge, but we're also subconsciously, without really knowing it, we are receiving the information that they are powerful, that they elevate themselves to a level of power because they have this knowledge. Whereas the truth is, we all have that same knowledge, we all have that same power. You know as much as anyone else. Knowledge is collaborative, right? The more diverse the knowledge is, the more empowering it becomes. So the more you learn from different sources, the more you learn from different people, like video essayists, but also that you learn from newspapers and broadcast media and TikTok and your family and your friends, the more diverse catchment of knowledge, the more you realise it's not this rarefied air. It's the more you know, the more powerful you become. And that's because of an ecosystem of knowledge, an ecosystem of epistemology. It is that epistemic community, which is not singular like a university or a union or a media organisation or something like that. We don't have to be insular and groupthinky, but knowledge can be a whole catchment for everyone. And the more diverse and the less boundaries we have, the more knowledge we have, the better the global epistemic community can be, because knowledge is power and you have plenty.
Yeah, I mean, unless like I've thought about this a lot, like adding, it sounds like a little bit of the vlog you're describing, but like actual narrative elements where, you know, they'll film themselves going to a lab or talking to experts or hiking up a mountain or, so yeah, if you want to, I don't think this is breaking the format, but you know, do your voiceover from the top of a mountain, whatever the tallest mountain is in New Jersey.
Today we learned what knowledge is, what a video essay is, how they generate knowledge, and why we can only ever know our own minds because existence is a product of perception and all knowledge is driven by consensus, not empirical evidence, due to the observer problem and our lack of understanding about consciousness, but knowledge has practical utility and we share most of the same knowledge anyway, so don't worry too much. Be sure to note this down in your textbooks, as these topics will come up in every video essay you will ever watch again, because every video essay is about epistemology. Thanks for watching this series.